Hello and welcome to the Inside Intelligence webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on Chinese espionage operations and tactics. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the Inside Intelligence playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the presentation to our moderator, Dr. Michael Ard, Program Director for the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Welcome everyone to Inside Intelligence. We have today a discussion on Chinese espionage operations and tactics with Nicholas Eftimiades, Assistant Teaching Professor of Homeland Security at Penn State's Harrisburg School of Public Affairs. Retired from the U.S. Department of Defense, Eftimiades spent 34 years in analysis, human and technical intelligence collection, and leadership roles in the CIA as a special agent in the U.S. Department of State and Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and as a senior intelligence officer in the Defense Intelligence Agency. His book, Chinese Intelligence Operations, is the first ever scholarly examination of the structure, operations, and methodology of the intelligence services of the People's Republic of China. His recent book, Chinese Espionage, Operations and Tactics, expands on that work. A non-resident senior fellow at the Forward Defense Practice of the Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, Eftimiades is a frequent lecturer and public speaker on future technology, space, and national security issues. Nick, thank you for being with us today. Welcome to our show, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thanks very much, Mike. I would like to, I have a presentation for today. I figure going between 30 and 40 minutes. And if there are no questions or start off things that you have, I'd like to jump into that. So here are the categories I'm going to deal with today, okay? I want to give you a couple of notes on the analytical methodology behind my work. And that's because there's always, it helps shape your questions and how you think about the data that's going to be presented to you. We'll go over quickly, actually, a few Chinese espionage cases. And when I say espionage, I'm using kind of the media term, right? Espionage, economic espionage, illegal exports of technology, and what we call covert action, or mostly FARA violations. In the US, covert influence activities. So we're going to go through a couple of those cases just so you can get a feel for how they're done. And then we'll wrap all that up with the analysis of Chinese espionage cases. Okay, and see exactly what's being done, how, by the numbers, right? How many hundreds of cases do this? How many cases do that? How they actually do it and what the target sets are. And you can even rank and prioritize them. And then lastly, I'll just go into a bit on China's evolving tradecraft, which has changed considerably over the last few years. So what you're going to get is sort of cutting edge on the operations and tradecraft side. I know a lot of people produce and work on things like the history or organizational structure. My work is very, very specifically focused on the actual intelligence operations that they conduct. So here you have just an example of my database screen, right? In this database, I have currently 935 cases. So that's a lot of cases to have. You see the individual, everything from age, PhD, where the event took place, whether the person was convicted, case numbers, what category it was. There's a note on tradecraft, and where I slice and dice tradecraft into several different categories and provide a lot of details within that, exactly what happened, what the tradecraft was, associates as well. Listed on what type of associate. So you can pull together, for example, identify over 60 Chinese universities that have been involved with this type of activity. So, just for the associations. On the left, you'll see the categories that I have broken down. The EAR, ITAR, APA, ASA are all categories of illegal technology exports. Research violation is what we see typically in the university system. On the right-hand side, you'll see coming up the specific Made in China 2025 technology list, right? The key lists of technology that China holds important to its development and its growth, right? So what I've done is for those cases that involve technology, categorize them, catalog them against that list to see how much emphasis is going into what area. The left side, again, coming up, the specific players, Ministry of State Security, PLA, state-owned enterprises, private companies, and PRC other. Had I known earlier when I created this database that the United Front Work Department and ultimately the Ministry of Public Security were going to play more prominent roles, I would have listed them separately. But suffice to say, they come under that category. And last but certainly not least, the type of tradecraft that's employed. After looking at these cases, you can say, okay, well, I'm seeing false names and documents, and I'm seeing third country meetings. Different types of tradecraft at different levels apply to different types of operations, which is sort of key to understanding how much emphasis they're putting in towards any specific operations. And when you crunch all these data, you actually can come up with some interesting categories. What it looks in, you're looking at total espionage cases, or whether you're seeing just Made in China 2025 cases. And this tells us something about their lines of effort in the categories of cases, specific technologies, how much they're focusing on them, and of course, who's behind it. You can also do the same things relative to tradecraft and say, well, give me the aerospace industry and let me see all the, who is actually doing the spying in the aerospace industry, right? And, against the aerospace industry, and the same thing on tradecraft. So you really can crunch a lot of great data out of this, not the least of which is, and this I prepared for Department of Commerce, and you can break it down by city, the specific types of technology that were targeted in each state or city. So it helps if you're on the other side of that, setting up defenses and doing pre-briefings to companies and things like that, where the specific target sets are. Okay, so that's basically an overview of what I've done here relative to analysis. Let's go into look at some of the espionage players and cases. First off, on the players, this is a Western construct, and I really don't like it, but I say it because this isn't the way China thinks of it, but the way we think about it tends to be, our law enforcement system tends to say, well, there are two types of collectors. There are these official collectors and then non-traditional collectors. As I say, it's only non-traditional for us, not China. And the official collectors are the Ministry of State Security, their version of the combination of the CIA, FBI, Ministry of Public Security, the Central Military Commission Joint Intelligence Bureau, and the Political Work Department, specifically the Liaison Bureau. There are a couple of other entities within that in the Chinese system, but they're not sort of major players. Non-traditional collectors. Non-traditional collectors often operate independently from the PRC intelligence service. And this is sort of a key point. We have United Front Work Department, state-owned enterprises. In China, that's over 300,000 entities, universities and scholars, companies and individuals. This is why we say, why I say that China has what we should call a whole of society approach to espionage, right? And this differs dramatically from the way the West approaches the problem set. The West approaches it's spy on spy, right? They're trying to recruit spies in other intelligence services, in other governments, etc. China doesn't do that. China, actually, the CCP, and they've been more and more successful at it, this go around, provides incentives for companies, for peoples, for organizations, and they provide law if you're not going to do that. The National Intelligence Law of 2017 insists you do that, but they provide incentives for people to go ahead and do that. So as an example of people flying drones over U.S. bases, I sort of doubt those people are tasked specifically by the Ministry of State Security to go to collect. But you know what happens if they show up back in China with that type of information? Well, the CCP is thrilled with them. They get, accolades. They get perhaps better business opportunities. They get introduction into senior officials, which is always helpful in that Confucianistic, humanistic-based society, right? So it's an incentive system, to galvanize all these organizations to, to spy on behalf of China as a whole. All right, let's jump into a couple of specific. Now we've seen some of the players involved. Let's jump into a couple of specific espionage cases. This one was recently concluded, actually, in 2024. Thomas got jail time. Zhao Wencheng from in 2022 to 2023, he was enlisted in the United States Navy. He was recruited through a WeChat stock investment group, which saw that he was in a Navy. He was approached by an individual who said he was in a maritime think tank. And he used, who ultimately recruited him to providing information. They used Telegram, WeChat, Apple, and PayPal for communications and payments for Zhao. Zhao used a dynamically encrypted IP address, which they instructed him to do, to transmit information. And that just means that the IP address kept moving so that it couldn't be traced. He brought his personal cell phone at the direction of his handler in Beijing or in China, brought a cell phone into military facilities, locations where it wasn't allowed for obvious reasons. For this reason, he took photos of computer screens, he took photos of equipment to provide that back to China. He repeatedly, at the direction of his handler, which shows what we call OPSEC, Operation Security, right? The guy tells him, all right, we want you to delete and destroy evidence of our communications and any of the information that you collect. After you send it, you destroy it. It's a regular characteristic that we see within Chinese online operations. The IO in this case, the intelligence officer, wanted to pay Zhao to purchase a new phone to use just for espionage activities. Zhao wasn't, I'm not going to say particularly bright about this, didn't show a lot of concern really, but he was sometimes hesitant to work and actually, in an oddity, very hesitant to even accept pay. The information passed included U.S. Naval Force movements and activities in the Pacific. Obviously, 2021 Pacific Fleet concepts of operations, CONOPS, military training exercises. He got from dozens of different computer screens, blueprints outlining blueprints or photos of blueprints, I should say, for a radar systems in Japan and Okinawa. Okay, so a low-level operation, only went a year and a half or so, but handled completely online, no risk to the case officer involved, only risk to the asset, to the person recruited, done completely done online. Second case, similar to that. And Patrick Wei actually fought this in court instead of negotiating. And he was just like within a month ago, I think, month to 2 months, convicted. So he was recruited in February 2022. They gave him collection priority, same way recruited, right? They recruited him over, online. He was he had more of a relationship with his intelligence handler, who offered to bring him and his mother for a visit to China. His mother was actively in supporting him on this, encouraging him to spy and saying this will lead to a good job back in China. But he did make a critical mistake that he told a fellow sailor that someone was trying to recruit him for what was quite, obviously espionage for China. And that person turned around and informed the FBI, even though Wei said, I'm not doing it. But, the person was suspicious enough that he turned around and reported Wei. Wei became a citizen. He did this while he was processing for his citizenship. Interesting, he told his mother that he had no regrets, other than Zhao, who was a little more hesitant to go through with this. Wei was pretty much all forward with it. In fact, he told his mother that on the, they have a transcript of this. They told his mother, imagine that there are other people that I know who are doing Uber at night, driving Uber at night, and the only thing I have to do is spy. So didn't show a lot of regret to that. The tradecraft involved in his case was he was approached again by someone sort of working for what they called a shipbuilding, in this case, a state-owned enterprise, the China Shipbuilding Industry Corporation, who was trying to build research and had an interest in ships, he or she said. The IO tasked Wei with specific collection priorities. These are your priorities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Discussed with him what he could get access to and what he couldn't, and then as a result, tasked him accordingly. We did the same thing. He directed him to film blueprints and to take cell phone photos. The two communicated using multiple types of commercial encryption methods. And, obviously for an operations security perspective, the case officer involved informed Wei not to talk about their relationship and to destroy all evidence of their communication and activities, right? Same thing that the instructions that Zhao was given. These happened at both around the same time, right? Literally concurrently. So I sort of suspect once they found Wei and they checked who he was talking to, and they found the communications going back to China, they might have looked at that email address as well and seen communications going back to someone else. I don't know that, but that's my guess on this. Sergeant Schultz, Corbin Schultz, and was a U.S. Army analyst to switch services. 24 years old, married, ex-wife, has 2 children. The handler knew that he had a love of race cars, right? So he kind of focused on that, saying that he would bring Schultz overseas for a Formula One race, scheduled payments, actually made payments approximately $42,000. They had discussed a bit in disguising these payments as car customization. Schultz had a couple of online forums that he set, showing himself drag racing and things like that, unofficially drag racing. So very much into cars, very much exploited by his IO, and theoretically, they were preparing to use it to cover the payments they was making. He didn't make a lot of payments in getting his money, $42K, because they closed on his house in September 2023. So he was forced out on that. Again, Schultz was recruited online. The IO claimed to be in Hong Kong, so somewhere between Hong Kong and China. Used, again, multiple encryption method, and the typical ones are WeChat and Telegram. And the reason being is that you can't subpoena those. Telegram owned by the Russians, WeChat owned by the Chinese. Doesn't matter what DOJ does. They're not going to, if they do penetrate it, they're not going to admit that in court. So it makes anything unusable, at least as far as evidentiary purposes are concerned. And neither the Chinese or Russian government are going to give them the information. So at least at a low-level commercial encryption level, that seems to be the safest for foreign intelligence services, or at least these the Chinese. Schultz got information from the computer systems. Again, much like the others, took photos of computer screens. He targeted other persons for recruitment, which is an interesting point. Once they were getting as much as they could out of Schultz, they suggested his intelligence officer suggested he start maybe approaching other people. I think as I read the data, it sort of looked like he wanted to approach his ex-wife, who was also in the military, and see what her interest was in, quote, writing reports. So Schultz methodically went around and destroyed evidence of the relationship and activities. They gave him money for buying a new phone, but he didn't. He kept it, $1,500. Let's see, and that's about. And they also made a big point with him, just to let know, of not using Wi-Fi near a military base, not using government networks. And I'll go into this a little in some of the tradecraft rules here, not using biometrics like on your cell phone, anything like that, not using scanning. They insisted everything be sent by pictures, no scanning of items. And because commercial scan, they keep a copy of it, right? No matter what, if you scan something, somebody's got a copy of it, for some length of time. So, they were insistent on things not being scanned as a function of operation security. So let's shift gears and get out of the American military and look at a case of economic espionage, which is kind of one of my favorites. Huawei with Dov Goldstein and Yang Lan took place in Denmark in 2019. Classic. Goldstein was an engineer for TDC Denmark, and that's its leading telecommunications company. They had the job of deciding who was going to bring 5G to Denmark, right? And they had 2 bids, basically. Huawei and Ericsson both submitted bids for their work. Well, just about 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, on the day the decisions were supposed to be made, Huawei submits an emergency revised bill. Well, that gets the president of TDC suspicious. What the heck, And the submission that they gave undercut Ericsson just barely in every category. So of course, TDC looks at this and says, "Wait a minute, there's something really wrong here." So they start an investigation internally. Investigators identified Dov Goldstein as their primary suspect, and they do this through only 6 people were supposed to have access to the bids, right, the formal bids, and they do this in tracking down where those went. They do it through the CCTV network and through the computer usage, and they find out that Goldstein's boss, who wasn't supposed to have it as well, gave it to Goldstein. So he becomes a prime suspect in this. In fact, as security identified him to the president of the company as the prime suspect, within a day or so, he comes pounding on the door of the president saying, "I hear I'm under investigation for passing along information to Huawei," which is something he never should have known. So, not a lot of security consciousness within that company for sure. And what the investigators do discover, though, is that Goldstein had regular meetings with Yang Lan, Huawei's country manager. And they went over this for years, that they had known each other for years, for all the years that Yang Lan had been there. The phone records that they pulled indicated that he had there was a 4.5-hour phone call between the two, just after Huawei submitted their first bid on the 5G contract. Right, so they submit the first bid. Presumably, Goldstein understands what the Ericsson bid was, and they have a 4.5-hour conversation about it online. Goldstein called Lan several times. They set up a meeting for going to March 4th. Security does a forensic analysis on Goldstein's laptop and reveals that the morning of that day he met with Lan, a folder was open on his laptop containing Ericsson's final offer and 5 PowerPoint presentations. CCTV footage inside the facility has him walking out with the laptop, packing away the laptop and walking out with it for his meeting with Lan, right? So they know he's meeting with him. They know the files were opened earlier in the day. TDC also discovers electronic listening devices in the boardroom, where they were conducting discussions. The committee members are reporting back to security, and they report some of them were surveilled on the streets. For security purposes, that the 6 people that were involved in this moved locations to a subsidiary organization that TDC owned and used it in their conference room. And security, of course, reports a drone looking in the window for that conference room, looking at their setup on the bulletin board on the 11th floor. So ultimately, TDC supported the Ericsson bids and said we're going to accept their bid. And shortly after that, the Chinese embassy sent a threatening letter to the government saying that this was going to impact their relations and all their commercial dealings inside China. So, I mean, it shows an interesting correlation between this type of economic espionage that occurs, at a company level, and the coordination and the relationship with the Chinese government in executing that sort of thing. Okay, last case we'll jump into, Linda Sun. And she was, for 12 years, had worked in a variety of positions within the Eastern District of New York. She was working for the New York State government. And so you can see all the positions that she held. She got to be pretty unique in that all the China issues were sent to her. Now, as it turns out, looks like that she's currently on trial in New York, that she was taking direction from the PRC Consul General Wang Bing and several Chinese diplomats within the political section of the Chinese consulate in New York. What she did was to manipulate New York State's policy towards the PRC. She was supporting China's policy, dismissing human rights issues. She literally excluded Taiwan from any access to New York State for years and years and years. And this was, all in the discussion between her and the New York City consulate, China's New York City consulate. So allegedly, she stopped Taiwan's officials' access to the governor's office under 2 different governors. She altered the state's policy positions and altered the language in official documents to soften any type of negative stance on China's human rights. She directed staff not to respond to inquiries on policy positions towards China. She allowed, this was kind of a biggie, those PRC officials to listen in on official state business phone calls in discussing policy and trade relationships with China. And lastly, she signed 2 documents, unauthorized invitation letters for officials in Hainan province to have them come for business purposes within, to conduct business relationships inside New York State. And the interesting part, she signed Governor Hochul's signature, right? Completely unauthorized, just goes and signs the governor's signature on it. She actually did this through, the response from Hainan provincial officials, which she was working with, were to provide favorable business dealings to her, through her husband, Chris Hu. Okay, and the 2 made millions in his shipments of medical supplies and equipment during the COVID crisis, and shipments of actually seafood to China. So tradecraft involved. She communicated with open emails, phone calls, WeChat texts, and personal meetings. This is kind of one of those situations where it blends what she could reasonably say were her official duties, and yet, working for China, while she was doing that. So she had reasons to speak with the Chinese consulate, and just kind of covered that, a hide in plain sight type of approach. He got personal business contracts within China. We see that as a method of payment in some economic espionage cases. Coordinated her activities and with U.S. non-government organizations, which you'll see in just a moment, under the United Front Work Department. Organizations that were supported and working for the United Front, as listed as part of the United Front Work Department. She was working with them to coordinate her activities with Hainan. Okay. Use those NGO cutouts for policy initiative, and actually launder the money through the bank accounts of a relative of hers who testified she had no idea any of this money was going through her bank accounts, an elderly relative. Okay, let's, sorry, I'm trying to move this through. So if you just take a look for the moment at what her activities were, and you see her positions below her and who she was supporting, specific entities she was supporting. To the right, you see her husband, Chris Hu, and his companies. And these were the companies, the seafood export company, the medical supplies companies that were selling to China and buying from China with millions of dollars of that they were giving in excess as payments. So much so that she had a $3.6 million house in upstate New York and a $1.9 million place in Hawaii. So the individuals, Frank Zhang, upper right, and Shi Jianping. Frank was is the head of the East Coast Hainan Association, and Shi Jianping is head of the All China Federation of Returned Overseas Chinese. And those are both listed as United Front Work organizations under the United Front Work. Okay, jumping quickly into analysis of Chinese, and I am sorry this is going so fast, but hopefully I'm going to finish up within 10 minutes and we can discuss it. You take a look, if we take all those 900 cases and take a look at things just in the realm of pure espionage, I don't mean economic espionage or anything, just pure espionage, you see a breakdown of who's conducting what, okay? So 48% the Ministry of State Security, 32% the PLA, its Joint Intelligence Department, other entities such as the United Front Work Department in this case, and Ministry of Public Security, and state-owned enterprises at a very small sliver. Where is the economic espionage effort? Well, you can see primarily it's in economic espionage, rather the entire effort, and economic is 25%. This is a little deceiving because if you take Taiwan out of the picture, that category on the right, espionage, cuts down to about 12%. Okay, so, if you're looking at this grandiose from a lot of cases, you'll see that, but you also get the understanding that much of their espionage activity is directed against Taiwan. You can break that down even further, and let's take a look at tradecraft. Specifically, if we start slicing and dicing tradecraft, you see the columns: Ministry of State Security, PLA, PRC, other, and state-owned enterprises, and it is color-coded to show different type of tradecraft that's employed by each one of those entities. And what becomes interesting here is that the variance of tradecraft even within an organization. So take a look at the first column that you see, the Ministry of State Security. How do you have 16 cases of no tradecraft and open communications and true names? And yet you do, and people are convicted on it. So a great variance of tradecraft even within organizations, which is something we can discuss as to why that is. Taking a look at all the cases that we have, you see again another view of it, the economic espionage. If you were to take a look at all the illegal export cases, the illegal technology export cases, comes to 282, which means it's larger than any individual category here. Made in China 2025, you'll see the two focus areas: information technology, which is primarily, or a lot of semiconductors, and development technology for semiconductors, lithographic imaging equipment. And that has skyrocketed since 2015. I mean, the number of cases has doubled since 2015. And then aerospace and aeronautical equipment down at the bottom, 126 cases. Half of those are military aerospace technology. Okay, just to give you the overall collection objectives, and this was a DNI chart that I took and altered, and the boxes that I have heavily marked there show multiple cases in each one of those categories. So this is it. This is what their collection objectives are. All right, lastly, I think I have a few slides on tradecraft. Nothing new here for anyone in this business, identifying, spot, assessing, developing, and recruiting individuals, to conduct espionage. Okay, basic stuff here. Everyone does it. China is a little different, that they do that targeting through social media, family, travel to China, when you travel to China, and they collect against you in that thing, and business relationships in China and overseas. So we've seen basically those four categories of how people are identified and targeted. Obviously, some in social media, that's done in droves. That's done on LinkedIn, that's done in Facebook, that's done in a number of other online categories of social media. Typically, a think tank has evolved just in the past few years or a research consultancy as cover for status, as they say, and cover for action, to ask what they're doing. They request a resume, or they use LinkedIn data, or sometimes in a couple of cases, they have a personal form that they give you. Fill out this form. And that form, if you're interested in a job, if you're interested in working and doing things for us, fill out this form. And that form is used as a source of validation. Who is this person? And for assessment, what access do they have that's usable for us? What is their access to information that we want, right? So whether it's a form, a resume, or your online social media data, this is a first step that they use this. The approach is done online as of late, the past few years, since Kevin Mallory, 2017, done through social media, online. Online recruitment has become a thing, tasking and control of assets. What's this mean? No risk on the part of the Chinese case officer. Okay, minimal risk involved. Sometimes they're traveling to the, to the target country, but most often than not, if they're doing this, they're doing it overseas. They solicit unclassified research paper, sort of a first standard thing, and they request non-public information. And for espionage, and I mean espionage proper, the money is the primary incentive, and they're paid through cryptocurrencies, Binance, etc. Money is not the only motivation in this, what we call the whole of society espionage approach of China. If you talk to counterintelligence people, they'll tell you the term MICE: money, ideology, ego, coercion, or coercion, ego. As has been a long stay in the intelligence community, as these are the motivational factors for people spying. Not so here. Here we actually have to expand that and look at the acronym BEWARE. Business opportunities, which you just saw in the Linda Sun case, ethno-nationalism, service to Mother China and the Chinese people, and we see that in a lot of cases, wealth or money, and you'll see that primarily in the technology transfer cases, academic advancement. We see academic research stolen, and I've seen the emails going back and forth. I'll do that. I want an associate professorship back in China. No, we'll give you an assistant professorship for this. No, I really want an associate professorship. It's good research. I'll publish it. The university will get a lot of credit, etc. So academic advancement, because it's a Confucian system, which holds scholarship at such a high tier, people will do anything to get it, to get that type of achievement. And so you do see that as leverage, as being used as a justification for theft of research, particularly in academia. Repression or coercion, not often used. Used in dissident cases, some dissident cases, but not really as much as people tend to think. And often that coercion that's used is very subtle. It's implied. It's, this could be a big problem. It could be a lot of trouble if you don't do that. A lot of trouble in Chinese means, don't overstep that line or your family's going to jail type of thing. So it's softly implied, but even then, it's mostly against dissident organizations. The Ministry of State Security specifically prefers to build relationships with recruited individuals. Last, emotional bonds, obligation, and friendship, renqing. We see this all the time. People who have known each other for decades, someone's back in the government in China, and they say, please help us out. We need 1, 2, 3. Very, very standard practice. Okay, I think I'm sorry, I had a few more slides, but Mike, if it's okay with you, I'll break here. This goes into some of the characteristics, but I think I've touched on these in the cases. This is more like a summary. MSS provides extensive feedback on the sources. You saw they pay more for original documents. They want original documents. They want them specifically because they avoid online reviews. I've seen a number of cases where they came and say, hey, we found the same information online. So they look for things like tagging and coding, and hey, no, we want this thing to be listed as secret, when we get it. So in some cases, we see a recruitment of subsources. And I have a slide summing this all up, which is this slide. So as you take a look at the comparative tradecraft characteristics, you can look at all the ones, and these are recent cases, right? The recent cases, online recruitment, Gurley Mutso, a lawyer in Estonia, she was recruited in person, but by a think tank, and they immediately wanted her resume that she provided. And the tasking and control was online and in China. And so we've seen a fair amount of that as of late. As the person gets closer to giving real classified information, the security issues get tighter. So we don't see the same type of tradecraft applied like in the case of Corbin Schultz and Patrick Way and Zhao Wenheng initially, is the same as after they start to provide actual classified information. Then we shift to specific types of software that they use for transmission. Then we shift to specialized encrypted websites to upload information. So the tradecraft, we see a separation of tradecraft getting more intense as a person provides more information. So I'm sure you all know that I have a book that I've done, 2025, Chinese Espionage Operations and Tactics. You're welcome to check that out. Also, just to let you know, my website, I post a lot of the interviews I do and my academic papers and my articles there. So so if you're interested in the subject matter, it's a good place to go, for a library, so to speak. I'll turn it back over to you, Mike.
Yeah, great. That's we have a lot to talk about. So
Yeah.
let's everybody, thanks. If you will put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, we'll be getting to them very shortly. I just have a couple. One is about our response, Nick, and over the last few years, the US government has gotten a lot more serious about it. I mean, I think a lot of the things that FBI had been urging companies and universities to do, we started to see that it was happening. Can you talk a little bit about that, what our response has been, And and a corollary to that question is, is arresting people enough?
Yeah, and the answer is the response, our system is not designed, okay? It's not designed to respond, to be able to effectively respond to this type of activity, whole of society approach. Our system is designed to protect secrets. You know, I tell the CI guys, I don't worry about you guys because you're going to do what you always do. You're going to circle the wagons. You're going to throw blankets on top of your secrets. You're going to sit on top of the shotgun and say, hooray, world is safe for democracy. But that doesn't help Procter & Gamble. It doesn't help, you know, scholars that are doing cutting edge research. And our system is not designed to protect them. And that's the fundamental problem. So the result, the turning point has been, you know, everyone making all the arrests that they can. Well, as I always say, the FBI has said publicly that it has 2 cases a day dealing with China. 2 times 365, 730 cases a year. Each one of these takes months to resolve. So there are thousands of cases in the rear. There's no way that they're going to resolve this. And the same thing for other law enforcement, you know, whether it's OSI or whether it's DHS, they're under an ocean of dealing with these cases. And the US has a lot of other problems. So they're not going to resolve it like that. But the point is that we don't have a leading strategy, a whole of government at a minimum, a whole of government that says, look, this is where we want the relationship to be in 10 to 15 years. These are the metrics that we're using to find to get from A to B. And these are the mechanisms of power that we're going to use to get in that, not only by ourselves, but along with our allies. So this is what we're lacking, the fundamental strategy of how to move from A to B on this.
One of the things, you know, you're reading the book and you're thinking, well, they have a whole of society strategy to get secrets, to steal intellectual property. And they're using social media to do it. They're reaching out to regular Americans to do it, and wherever, universities, think tanks, wherever. I mean, do we need a whole of society approach for CI in this country?
Well, Facebook's taken down at least 30,000 fake websites coming from the Chinese government. So whether we do or not, de facto, we have a whole of society. What we don't have is a coordinated approach. We have tens of thousands taken down off LinkedIn. But the same thing, you know, it's either covert influence targeted against elections, it's targeted against dissidents. And you go and click on their website and or Facebook, and it downloads malware into your computer. So, you know, tens and tens of thousands of these cases. We have it whether we want it or not. That's what's in our lap.
Be careful about your LinkedIn contacts or who you're accepting as LinkedIn or responding to your LinkedIn contacts, which we saw in the Dixon Yao case, right? I don't think you mentioned that, but that was one I think probably raised a lot of people's consciousness about LinkedIn.
Yeah, and Dixon Yao, as you know, collected over 400 resumes by people with security clearances, and you know, for the Ministry of State Security, and they were slicing and dicing and telling him to approach this one, that one, and then guiding him on the types of discussions and things to look for. People with divorces, people that were having money problems, people that were, you know, desperately seeking one thing or another. So a very, very effective thing. I will tell you, my prediction is that all the stuff on LinkedIn that you see is that within the next 5 years, and the initial approaches will all be done through AI.
Right.
You know, we're all starting to see it, but they'll just set the software and say, go recruit people. And that'll be the approach.
Right. All right, let's get into some questions. I know there's a lot in the Q&A in the chat now, and so I'm going to try to go through these. And if you please, everybody, yeah, be as clear as you can in the questions. I'm going to start with this one. Can you touch on the new or improved talents program?
Yeah, it's sort of a big area to do. For what happened with the talents program, and we saw this, you know, several years ago, is that because it got such negative, you know, the 1,000 Talents program, and again, there are over 500 talent programs that we know of. Okay. Provincial level talent programs, you know, local talent programs, national level talent programs, etc. So China started making strategic changes to it, started investing in people come to China. So we don't have this issue of, you know, and, you know, we'll take care of the kids, we'll put them in school, you know, all that type of stuff. So China's evolved that talent program to avoid the negative publicity that they're getting, because they're stuck in a situation where the only benefit, the biggest benefit for having Michael come to in providing information or providing data and leading scholarly works at a university in China, is that we have to be able to advertise that. Doesn't do any good if Michael's working in secrecy. So, I mean, you want to attract good graduate students, you want to attract funding, you want to make advancements, all those things that you've got to be able to publicize the individuals that are coming. That was the problem for China, because that's how the FBI detected everybody who was, who was lying on the forum saying they weren't working in China or they weren't working with China. So an easy process. So they had to get around that. And the way they are getting around that now is to invite people for year-long stints in China as getting paid very, very well, but that completely avoids, the issue of dealing with U.S., with U.S. funding, government funding on a different line. So those are the latest advancements in those talent programs.
Other questions on the tradecraft, which you highlighted, the variety of tradecraft, and Rex was asking, do you think the cases where no tradecraft is used, for example, true name, open lines of communication, etc., were perceived by the Chinese as low potential, then to confuse counterintelligence by overwhelming them?
No.
Or what? How do you ascribe? What do you ascribe to that?
That one's kind of actually easy. Different objectives. So you find things like submitting false documents are very characteristic of technology. Obviously, the illegal exports, right? All the false documents and names of things are either submitting false information for illegal exports, or submitting for payments, cash payments, and using false names and false company names. Typically that, but you don't find that, for example, that type of tradecraft in economic espionage. Economic espionage, what you do find is an insider threat, and you find the person making repeated trips to China, right? Yep. Typically, economic espionage, business is the ultimate objective, not money. So it's not a cash out deal of here's $100,000, go get us this technology. It's come back to China, go in this business, we'll pay you a big salary and bring that technology with you. And we see that in a lot of cases. Ding, I forgot his full name, from Google, having allegedly stolen Google AI, is a recent case. Back and forth to China all the time, living in China, actually, while he was developing his own business and chief technology officer for another business, with all the data he sat on, taken from Google and AI, developing a competitor. So the tradecraft as a result is different. So you look at the technology, the tradecraft is different. You look at the objectives of and the type of espionage, economic espionage, covert action, etc. The tradecraft is different depending on that.
Do the China see activities in espionage the same way we in the West see them? Or is this just part of the normal business culture?
I'm going to say it is more part of the normal business culture. And that's, reflective of the fact that it happens inside China all the time. So it's just
they're doing it to themselves.
Right. Yeah. In fact, here's a key point. In 2015, Xi Jinping took away the responsibilities of economic espionage away from the PLA Unit 61398 and gave it to the Ministry of State Security. Mm-hmm. The reason was the PLA was selling it to Chinese companies internally, inside China. So, I mean, just on their own, they were working for China against Chinese companies, for Chinese companies, and, corruption was so pervasive there. So, there's a couple of reasons of this historically, and it goes back to, Confucianism is not based so much on rules as it is on expected codes of behavior. Communism came in and really shattered that. So this type of theft and stuff is very common. In Neng Pian Ju Pian is a Chinese saying, that's what's the translation in English? It's it's only the thief that the bad ones get caught, that type of thing. So it's pretty pervasive in a lot of aspects of society. You see it in the construction industry and such. And this is just an enhancement. We're the ones who are different. We're the ones who say, hey, that's a law. You can't do that. And they're like, what are you talking about? who do I have to go to pay off to get rid of this?
Right. Okay. So a couple more questions. What indicators should you look for a think tank if you think it's being covered for espionage? I would assume any other type of business. Are there things that you'd look for as indicators?
Yeah, the first indicator I can give you right off the bat is not using the think tank's official email. And when you look at the official email, and I just have a case sitting on my lap about this with the Atlantic Council, right? Some guy is pretending to be from the Atlantic Council, and he has like an extra, letter in the email address. And if you're not looking at it very carefully, you don't see that it's Atlantic Council is not spelled correctly. So just things like that. Sometimes they use real think tanks and they masquerade as think tanks. And while I'm doing this from my home, that's why I'm using a Gmail. And sometimes they do made up think tanks, which is a lot easier to check and to look upon. So look for the connection first. I mean, person's approaching you on email, has 3 connections, says they're with a think tank, and is giving you a false email. Then that's a good indicator that you're being played. Also, never ever open or download anything that they give you, particularly on LinkedIn, because we have found viruses inside PDF files.
What about in higher education now? I mean, are they also looking at one time I asked about the community colleges, or even are these also targets for these type of activities?
Universities are, but they tend to be research universities. And I don't know. I haven't gone down and looked at community colleges. I can't tell you. I haven't separated that out. But certainly the research done at universities is clearly a target set. And we've seen multiple cases, not only about the research done at them, but them being used for other purposes, to ship things overseas, as an example, research institutes and universities. So yeah, pervasive at the university level. I just don't know, don't have the data on a community college level.
Walker asked a question about the different regional offices of the MSS and different varieties of trade crafts and levels of professionalism. How meaningful is the competition and fratricide between the regional offices? We might even expand that about all the institutions involved in espionage.
Right. I could go into this at some great length. So what? Look, the MSS is not the big dog in town in China. Okay, it would be the Ministry of Public Security. They dwarf the MSS. So at each provincial and municipal level, there is a CCP committee, a political legal leading commission, okay, which basically coordinates all the law enforcement and intelligence within that province or municipality or that sector, okay? So all the reporting from the Ministry of Public Security, and they had tons of it, comes into that body. The reporting from the Ministry of State Security, comparatively very little, comes into that body, depending on the area of the province and such, comes into that body. Okay, that body itself, the commission, has all the reporting from the neighborhood committees, from the CCP committees inside companies and inside state-owned enterprises. Much bigger flow of information than either of the two, and that comes into them as well. So that commission at that level is the one tasking and directing, and they even have cross persons, an MSS officer sitting in the commission officer sitting in the local MSS office, that type of thing, to control and to direct. As of this, the MSS does a lot of briefing of people who have exposure to foreigners, briefing hotels, briefing companies that have exposure to developing informants. The MPS, and again, most of this is focused on internal in China. Threats that they consider internal in China has vastly greater reach. And so pound for pound is providing more data. That commission tends to turn the thumb screws on both Ministry of State Security and Ministry of Public Security, which is where you lead to a lot of shortcuts. And it's really operational direction on what to collect is coming from that provincial level shop, not from headquarters. Headquarters does have a role in supporting and administering and overseeing the tradecraft, but locally they're calling the shots pretty strongly. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks. I think there's a lot of and I mean one of the things that your book points out is that there's a lot of redundancy and overlap in what they're targeting. It's maybe not as well coordinated as well, that stands to reason, given how many institutions are involved. Question on Canada, their approach to this, how they had a recent case of a naval engineer who was trying to sell design for Arctic patrol vessels. Do you have a sense of how well they're doing against this issue?
It's only recently come up with Canada. It is because Cooper and Dean Baxter and a few others have been writing on this and bringing it into the public fray. Otherwise, it was completely ignored in Canada. The fact that CSIS, their intelligence service, identified specific members in parliament that were supported financially by the Chinese embassy. I mean, when it was dismissed or not even brought to the public's attention. So Canada's got a very long way to go to wrestle with this. They have just now started to bring many of these issues publicly. So I don't know how well they're going to do. I mean, China owns a fair amount in Canada at this point.
Right. What about the role of Chinese embassies in this network?
Well, obviously supporting this. You see in the case of Christine Fang, where MSS officers meeting local assets, to conduct espionage. So like any foreign embassy from just about every country, they're going to do their specific aspects in supporting espionage. Chinese embassy also has an education department that manages and controls, coordinating with the United Front Work Department, that manages and controls student groups, across the United States, that approves positions in the Chinese Scholars and Students Association. They have to be good Chinese, good CCP members to be accepted into those positions at university level. So there's a lot of control that they have in the local, in the student population, as well as the diaspora, and it's all executed out of the embassy. You have the Ministry of State Security, United Front Work Department, and the Education Department all working
together. Right. Several of our audience have asked questions about the universities, and I like to try to just sum this up a little bit. How do we? I mean, you're at a university, so are we, of course. How do we think about this? I mean, there's obviously Chinese students who are welcome at our universities. And most of them are nothing to worry about. How do we stop being paranoid about this and be realistic about it?
I'll tell you how. You go out to lunch with them. I mean,
Yeah.
And I know this sounds ridiculous, but Purdue did a study on this, and what they show is that in 4 years of college in the U.S., the attitudes of Chinese students studying here don't change. But they do show they have an extraordinary level of depression studying it, but their attitudes towards the U.S. don't change. When they get out of school, for those who stay on in the local economy, who still stay on and work in the U.S., their attitude goes up, skyrockets up. And that is because of the control mechanism inside the universities, right? They
Right.
stay with the Chinese students. They're watching each other. They're under control. Some of them, because some of them are reporting to the embassy, so they're under control. They're under threat. For that time, they get away from that environment. And like, oh my gosh, this place is fantastic. Who knew? So that's the thing. You literally got to get them to the point where they're mixing, where they understand society, where they're blending in, so they can say, okay, now I can make a fair and objective critique of what I think about the United States. That a decision of what I think about the United States. That's where we have to get people.
And I think that's a great way to finish up for today. Nick, I want to thank you very much for a great presentation. We look forward to talking again about this, I hope. And we will have a recording of Nick's presentation on Chinese espionage operations on our YouTube channel for Johns Hopkins AAP YouTube. Just look it up. Inside Intelligence. We have 58 recordings now in our Inside Intelligence
building up quite a library.
So yeah, we're proud to add this one. It's been a lot. We've been overdue having you, Nick. I'm glad you could make it today. And thanks everybody for great questions. Look forward, we'll keep also an eye out for new Inside Intelligence episodes coming up and in December and also in the new year. So we'll look forward to that. Thanks everybody and have a good one.